So it is day 3 of shooting this location, and it looks like we might get some good light. It's hard to tell what it's going to do. Really good side light on the mountains and peaks. Sunrise is back over in that area. Really nice fall colors down in here. So this is the composition that I'm about to shoot out in the field. And I actually captured this shot a few minutes before I made the video when the light was getting really intense. And what I tried to do here, since I didn't have much lighting down here in the foreground, is I used the foreground for anchor and scale. And by anchor, I just mean someplace for your eyes to rest and start. So what often happens if you try to oversaturate all of your image, your eyes have nowhere to rest. And if you've ever looked at a really saturated image where all parts of the image are saturated, it's just hard to look at it, and you normally just leave and look at another image instead. So I kept this really dark in the bottom, but I also used the trees to show scale of this massive, I think it's around 12,000 foot peak back here. Some really good climbing up in these parts on these glacier fields. So I kept the saturation very low in the bottom, and I actually desaturated it some. So your eyes would start here, and then I slowly increased the saturation as I moved up through the photo. And the sunrise got so intense as far as how bright the sky was, I actually had to desaturate these yellows, reds, and magentas to kind of hold them in line in the final photo edit. But I like how this one turned out. I like all the layering here in the middle. I think it looks pretty cool. And usually YouTube completely destroys the image quality. So if you guys want to check out my portfolio, you can go to davemorrow.photography. And that'll take you directly to my photo portfolio. And then you can see the actual full-size images. But let's jump into the shooting technique, and I'll discuss how I captured this one out in the field. Go ahead and pull up my level, make sure everything looks good. And you can see on this how I've kind of split that bottom up, and then split another mid-ground up, another line here, and then here. So it's almost split into 4 separate horizontal lines going from bottom, middle, top, and then cloud cover across the image. And that gives 4 different interesting points throughout the image, so nothing's really dead in that composition. So the first thing I'm going to do here is grab my single point spot focus, and I just control that with the keypad right here, or directional pad, or whatever you want to call it. And then from there I will just zoom in at 100, and I will use back button autofocus. You can check out my focusing video for that if you want to learn more. And then after I'm done with that back button autofocus, I can just grab the focal ring up top on the camera and turn it slightly to make sure that the focus is perfect. And since I'm zoomed in at 100% like that, it's really easy for me to see when that focus is optimized and know that I'll have a sharp image. So I always like to focus first because that allows you to have clean light coming through your lens. And then on the back of the live view screen, while adjusting all your other settings, you can really see what's going on and how they will apply to the final image. So for this shot, since I have a pretty large depth of field, foreground to background, I'm going to take some shots at f11, which I shoot probably 95% of the time. And then I'll take a few more shots at f16, changing nothing else about the composition or any of my settings. And we'll see which ones are sharper. So a lot of times f16 for most cameras will produce a larger depth of field, closer foreground, more distant background, all in focus. But you'll see that even though those points are all in focus, that they are not as sharp as they would be shooting at like f11. So there's a fine balance. So usually when I'm shooting in close crop of landscapes that are very detailed and then have a very close foreground and distant background, I'll take some at f11 and f16, and then at home I can kind of compare and contrast to see which ones I like the most. So for this one, I'll take one at f11 and one at f16, and we can see what we think of both. So let's quickly compare 2 different images, one shot at f11 and the other shot at f16, and you'll see how the f11 image is much sharper. So these are the exact same composition, same settings, same exact focal point right here. Only difference, f11 versus f16. So before we zoom in here to 300% and check it out, if you guys are really enjoying this video, if I've taught you a few things, I'd really appreciate it, and it helps me out a lot if you hit the like and subscribe button under the video. It's free, and it helps to promote my channel so more people can learn from the material. So let's zoom in here and see what's going on. So first, we are looking at the f16 image down in the rocks. Both are very sharp focus for this area because the focal point is right up here. So nothing else has changed except the f-stop. Here's the f16 and here's the f11. f16, f11. You can see the f11 image has much more texture and sharpness. Now the f16 image does have a larger depth of field, but I find f11 to be a better balance between depth of field and image sharpness. And you would notice if you went up to f22, you would really start to lose image sharpness even more than this f16 image. If you went down to f8 instead of f11, you would get a bit more sharpness and texture than the f11 image, but your depth of field would decrease to the point where I don't find it to be as great for landscape photography. So f11 is the fine balance between extended depth of field and really sharp image quality and texture. So let's jump back to the shooting video and finish the rest of this out. I'm going to go with f11 first, and I'm shooting aperture priority mode. So shooting aperture priority mode, you need to dial in the exposure compensation value over here. So to do that, I just pull up my RGB histogram, and using the RGB histogram, I just hold down this exposure compensation, and I want to push that histogram as far to the right, making the image brighter as possible without going over the edge. And you can see that my little EV compensation bar starts blinking. That's because there's not enough light in the scene for live view to work. So to allow enough light in there, I can just open my f-stop a little bit. See how it now stops blinking and I have enough light in. So I just open the f-stop to adjust my histogram using live view. Then once I'm all done here in this setting, I can take the f-stop back to what it was before I finish the rest of the settings. So that looks good. This image is overexposed, but nothing's blown out, so I can darken it back down in post, and everything will be good to go. So since I exposed to the right on all of my images, when I import all of my files into Lightroom, when I get back from a shoot, I actually have Lightroom apply a -1 exposure on the import. So even though I overexpose everything out here without blowing out the highlights, when I get back home, my computer automatically darkens that image back down to what I saw while out shooting in the field. This gives me a lot of dark detail that I wouldn't have otherwise, so I can pull that shadow slider up further than I would have been able to if I just exposed for the normal exposure of the scene. So you'll notice the back of my screen looks really light, but that's okay. So now I'll just go back to f11 here, and I'm going to shoot ISO 100. And the fact that the histogram shifted back left is not a big deal. That's just because enough light couldn't get in the front of the live view screen. So not a big deal. You just get used to shooting like that, and you need to know what's going on when your exposure compensation starts blinking and how to kind of battle it with that trick that I just used there. I've already set my white balance, but I just use a Kelvin white balance. And using Kelvin, you can kind of watch the back of your screen, and holding down the Kelvin button, you can go from low Kelvin values, which are blue, cooler colors, to high Kelvin values, which are yellowish or warmer colors. So my goal is to neutralize the Kelvin, meaning the colors that I see on the back of the screen are very close to what I see out here in front of me. And by doing that, I can have a histogram that matches what I actually see out here in the field. But if my Kelvin values are off, meaning the photo is bluer on the back of the screen than it is out here, that will actually shift my histogram to the left, because blue is a darker color than yellow. The other also holds true. If I have my back of the screen looking much more yellow than the actual scene out here, that would shift my histogram right on the back of the screen. So it really does not matter the color of your image for a RAW file, because once you get home, you can adjust the RAW file wherever you want. But the color of the image does matter for getting an accurate histogram on the back of your camera, so you can really see what you're shooting and know the right exposure for that scene. It's also nice when you get home and you adjust your shots with Kelvin to be neutral. There's a lot less having to adjust the tint and temperature in Lightroom or whatever your RAW file editor is. So that's a trick that I like to use out here. So everything looks good there. A little bit overexposed, good to go. I have a 3-second delay with mirror up mode here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the shutter button. And that light died really, really fast. I'll have to review some of these shots with the good light and from the past few days here in this video or a future video. So what I can do here now, I have my RGB highlight blankies on. I can see I didn't blow anything out. I'll zoom in to where I focused, the focal point. Then I'll go below it and up above it as well. And I can see the whole image looks sharp there. So that was the f11 shot. So I had said that I wanted to test f16 as well. I'll just increase my f-stop. Aperture priority will hold the same exact image brightness or exposure by automatically adjusting my shutter speed for me, holding that same exposure compensation value. So I can just take that one as well. And I took a bunch of shots yesterday as clouds were like moving through here. Really nice dynamic light. Sun breaks and then clouds, and got some really good stuff. Zoomed in there on that peak. Here was one of the shots that I captured and edited that I ended up liking a lot. And I used the same technique here. I kept the saturation fairly low in almost all of the image, except where the light was hitting. And I also used complementary color harmony. So warm colors, yellow, orange, and cool colors such as dark blue lying across from each other on the RGB color wheel. So all these things can help to move the viewer's eyes through the photo. So keeping a dark area that's desaturated in the bottom, the eyes are going to want to move to a lighter area that has more saturation. And adding that complementary color harmony in there can really work well. Here was another shot that I took during the day, and this is actually zoomed in on a peak that's directly next to the shot we just looked at. But without the light going through it, I kept all the colors very muted, and I just worked on all the dappled light on all the peaks. So what I did for this shot was I just set my tripod up, and as these clouds moved through, the lighting constantly changed. So I would constantly take different shots until I got one that I really liked where the light was hitting the foreground really nicely, the midground, and then the clouds coming through also looked really cool. So let's jump back to the shooting technique and finish up that last shot. So same process for this shot. This is the f16. Check the focal point, check below it and above it. And you'll notice I'm just scrolling up and down the middle of my horizon here. So straight vertical line up and down. If I check that and it's sharp and there's nothing too close in my foreground, then everything will be sharp throughout the entire image. And since my highlight blankies are not blinking, I don't really need to check this histogram for this specific shot, but you can see the RGB histogram is also in line. So if you guys want to learn the technicalities of all these shooting techniques and why I actually make these decisions, I have some really good long-form articles on it that discuss, give examples, that go my step-by-step methodical thought process for making all these different selections in the field. And you can also download them as a PDF. I like to do that so people can download the guides, they can put them on a smartphone, and then when they come out here backpacking to shoot and they don't have internet, they can just go through their smartphone and kind of learn with their camera as read the guide at the same time. So it's a really good study guide you can bring out in the field with you, and it's free on my website. I will link that below. So it is completely socked in right now. The weather just came through, and I got my tent packed up. I'm trying to make it down this semi-icy trail, but if I swing this around, headed down right through there and drop down the left side of that pass. Just came from right up on top of that peak, and behind that peak is a saddle, and that's where I was camped out at. So I just checked the satellite for the weather for the next few days. It looks like this area is probably going to get a lot of snow. It's already started right now. So I am on a massive chain of mountains in the northern tip of the United States, northwest tip, and I'm on the west side of those mountains. So a lot of times the moist, cool air will come off the Pacific Ocean, and it will just get stuck on the west side of these mountains. It'll just dump a lot of snow, a lot of ice, rain, everything else. So my goal is to go to the vehicle, get some fresh gear, get my other tent, which is dry out some of this gear, get food, and then head over to the east side of the mountains. Been scouting out some alpine lakes over there that are surrounded with larches, which are a tree that grows high up in the alpine and turns a really nice bright yellow this kind of year. So the goal is to go shoot that with fresh snow. And I'd like all the foreground to have like really nice fresh layer of snow like you see here. You can see all the tips of the plants get like a frosting on them, like right there. Now when that happens and light hits it in the morning, it makes this really nice color. It almost brings out the color of the plants and all the autumn colors even more than they would have been otherwise. So that's the game plan. We'll see if it happens or not.